Yeah, the first one that I had with you guys, it's a pretty general question. I'm just interested in how you see the men's rights movement more broadly sort of standing, where it's, you know, the number of people involved. Is it growing? Is it shrinking? Yeah, where do you kind of see it at, I guess?
I don't know if you want me to start. I'll answer that one. Yeah. So my view is I think the men's rights movement has started to grow really quickly in the last few years. I mean, a lot of people don't realise it's actually been around for well over 100 years, but it really languished in obscurity until about 10 years ago. And since then, numbers have been growing at a steady rate. And I would say since the release of the Red Pill documentary, we're seeing a lot of additional interest and a lot of growth. At A Voice for Men, we are seeing a huge upswing in people contacting us, offering to assist us in any way that they can.
I'd also say that things are getting a little bit rosier out there for men's rights activists. When I first started doing this, it was about 50-50 negative and positive feedback on anything that I did, coming at me in emails and comments and things like that. And now it's probably about 98% positive. So it just really, at least people who are actually directing comments at me, about 98% positive comments. So, and my channel's just been growing very, very steadily for the last 6 years or so. So, yeah, it's getting bigger. Anybody else?
Yeah, I'd just like to say, I mean, I have exactly the same experience. We launched our party, Justice for Men and Boys, 4 years ago. And the hits, you know, to the website just grow and grow and grow. Mainstream media interest and attention is growing with every year, and we're finding it's still very much, not very much, but a lot of it is still online. But we're finding year after year that more and more people are coming out publicly. So, you know, our number one campaigning issue at the moment is male genital mutilation, which is illegal in the UK. And we're finding every protest we do, we have more people. It's illegal, yes. It's not specifically illegal, but it doesn't need to be. It's illegal under the Offences Against the Person Act 1861. It's at least actual bodily harm and probably grievous bodily harm. It would require a parliamentary override to be legal, and that has never existed. So the legal position is black and white. But the criminal justice system will not bring prosecutions. So that's what we're working on.
Cool. Anyone else? Do you want to follow up? Yeah, sure.
I was interesting. You were saying, Robert, that you know, you're seeing a growth in the people that you're sort of hearing from and things like that. What are the metrics that you're using to kind of measure the growth? Are there solid metrics that we can look at to sort of see a measure of growth anywhere? And how does the sort of the online response that you see translate to the people that are attending face-to-face meetings as well?
So I would say really there are some metrics we can use, but first of all I would say just observationally from comments I see online, for example, the nature of the comments of how they've changed from now, say, to 5 years ago. It's I think it's fairly evident there is a change, but we actually maintain internal systems at AVFM which track queries, for example, and we can see there's a definite upswing in queries, and we can actually clearly see from the time the Red Pill was released that that was a definite upswing. So that's a quantitative metric.
So I was just wondering, so in regards to some of the backlash that you've received, obviously the recent release of the Red Pill movie saw widespread protests. I just want to know if some of you could discuss some of the negative feedback that you've gotten from the broader population.
I mean, can I use this? Yeah. The point about the protests is they were very much coming from a minority group. If you look at the first screening of the Red Pill that was banned, was cancelled in Australia, which was last October, they had 1,000+ women protesting, and then within a few days they had 14,000 people protesting the fact that they'd cancelled the movie. So it is a really tiny group who are jumping up and down and causing all the reaction against the red pill, and I have no doubt that there's an enormous reaction against that. And we have had red pill screenings around Australia. We've had cinemas full to the brim, hundreds of people coming to see this movie. And whenever the discussion around, I wrote an article around the first bannings, we get 800 comments on the newspaper, which is pretty extraordinary. 800,000 comments of people objecting to the fact that this tiny minority group has managed to cancel screenings of this movie. So I think there's no question that in the general community there's enormous support for the movie, and particularly just support for discussion, which of course is the essence of the movie.
We held the movie at Murdoch University. The guild, the student guild, was sponsoring, and it was a huge, huge success. We got around, I would say, 100 people watching. And I think what Tina is saying makes perfect sense to me. Some of the students coming to me to express their opinions about the movie, and they were highly impressed with the movie, the quality of the movie. So the movie has been a tremendous success. It has caused a huge impression, and many people have changed their minds as a result of what they have seen.
I do want to give a more general comment as far as backlash to the things that I talk about and the things that everyone here talks about, is that it really does seem to be that the majority of people are aware of a lot of the things that we're discussing. They're aware on some level, and they don't tend to, I don't tend to, when I come out to the cashier at my grocery store and they, what do you do for a living? And I say, I advocate for men and boys and their issues, and I'm an anti-feminist. I don't tend to get any backlash at all. They're like, oh, maybe there's like you don't want women to have the vote? And I'm like, no, nothing like that. But here's why I do it. And then they're like, oh, yeah, no, that makes total sense. So, I mean, I think that really that most of the population are not politically activated. They are not political people, and they're not going to go out and protest. They're not going to go out and hold signs. They're not going to sign petitions. They're not going to do those things. But they seem to be very much aware of the need for advocacy for these particular issues. And I think that what we see in the press is often a really, really skewed picture of what exists out there. Because what I see out there in my day-to-day life is a small group of very passionate advocates on both sides of the spectrum, right? The people who are involved in this and the people who are protesting us. And the rest of the community is kind of wondering what is even going on, and what are these feminists all so freaking out about, because yes, boys need help in school, and yes, my brother-in-law is going through a really bad divorce, and he hasn't seen his kids in 2 years, and those are issues, and they're important, right? So this is just what I see, and the backlash, like Bettina said, I think it's a pocket of very, very vocal, a small pocket of very vocal, very passionate, very politically motivated people. So.
One interesting aspect I find to the opposition that we see is that it actually varies from country to country. In Canada, for example, there's been a lot of boots on the ground opposition to various screenings and so forth. We've seen a lot less of that here. One venue did receive threats over the phone, and the University of Sydney venue had in real life protests, in real world protests. However, a lot of the opposition we've seen in Australia has been online in the form of change.org petitions and so forth. So it is interesting how each country has exhibited different characteristics.
Cool. Did you want to follow up? Or?
I've got other questions.
Anyone else?
So this is a bit on the fly, but just based on what we've been talking about, you talked about the movement growing. and we've talked about the controversy with the red pill, but in New Zealand, which is where I come from, which I know about, the red pill had very little impact with politicians and things like that. So almost every politician in New Zealand was invited to screen that. So what sort of growing awareness are you seeing amongst hierarchy in society for these sort of issues?
Okay, yeah, okay, thanks. So in different countries, there've been some countries in the English-speaking world where we've seen sitting politicians stand up and support the men's rights movement and anti-feminism. But more generally, though, we're seeing people who are powerful and well-connected in society increasingly supporting what we're doing, but in a quieter manner. They can't necessarily. It may be too damaging to do it publicly, but if they're able to support us in other ways.
I'd also say that one of the biggest stumbling blocks that we're facing right now is, it's very easy to advocate for a specific women's issue because all of the sound bites are there in the cultural zeitgeist. You know, equal pay for equal work. Everybody knows what that means. That's all you need to say, right? And then if you want to object to the presentation of that, say somebody says, women only earn 77 cents on a man's dollar, women deserve equal pay for equal work, which implies that they're not getting it. You have to spend about half an hour deconstructing everything, and that's not. It's not a very impassioned way of doing things. It's a very logical and detailed way of taking apart something that's essentially a slogan and a call to action that is at the disposal of feminists and other advocates. And so what we need to be doing, and political action and influencing politicians and stuff like that, that's not going to happen until if they do not act, there will be consequences. And this is just the way it is with politics. If you have two sides and the feminists who are very well funded and everybody understands their slogans, if they want one thing and we want another, the politicians are always going to go with them for the most part. It's perfectly illustrated by Florida. Governor Rick Scott vetoed two bills, one in 2013 and one in 2016, that would reform lifetime alimony and enact some shared parenting measures in that state. And it was overwhelmingly supported by the public. Polls indicated that support in the public was 75 to 80%. I don't know of a president who's had those kind of numbers in terms of popularity. And then it passed both houses with overwhelming bipartisan support as well. And it got up to the governor to sign, and the National Organization for Women convinced him to veto it in 2013. They gave him their list of concerns, and he was reelected after that. And then the advocates who were sponsoring this bill came back and they said, we've amended this bill to address all of these concerns that you said were the reason why you vetoed this bill. They've all been addressed now. All of that problematic language has been removed. It, again, had vast public support, passed both houses with votes on both sides of the aisle. And again, he vetoed it at the behest of the National Organization for Women with absolutely no excuse. And the reason he can do that is because the first time he did it, it didn't mean political death for him, right? And so you can't just blame politicians, because part of a politician's job is getting reelected. And if you have this massive, well-funded propaganda machine, essentially, whose slogans everybody understands, and of course nobody's going to say, oh, women don't deserve equal rights or anything like that. And so all they have to do is say, if you're an anti-feminist, you don't think women deserve equal rights. And so they have a very, very simplistic narrative that's well understood by the public. And it's one that impassions people. And it brings them to action when they see something that that they're being told is an injustice. And as long as there is that, and as long as politicians don't risk not getting reelected when they do things like what Governor Rick Scott did, we're not going to have a huge amount of support from politicians. So it really needs to come from the ground up. It absolutely does.
Yeah, I'd just like to say a few words. At last year's London conference, we had Philip Davis speak, a Conservative MP, the only MP out of 650 MPs in the British House of Commons who ever talks about, whoever criticises feminists publicly. And he's very passionate about things like equal sentencing for men and women, which of course makes him a misogynist and a sexist and an absolute Satan. So he has standing against him at the election that's just happened, Sophie Walker, who's the head of the Women's Equality Party, and he's told the press a few times that he gets plenty of support privately across the board, right across the political board. But none of these people will support him publicly. And Karen's absolutely right. Individual politicians have to start feeling some heat. I mean, at the moment, there's no reason for them to really care about men. So men need to organise better and really start to make life painful. Men and women, have to make these people answerable.
And we need to give support to the politicians who are brave enough to stand up against the sort of current orthodoxy. Classic example is Senator David Leyonhjelm, who at present is mounting a one-man campaign in Senate estimates questioning the bureaucracy about expenditure on domestic violence. And he's been given the data, he's arguing from a position of evidence and asking the bureaucrats how do they justify mounting these enormous campaigns and spending literally hundreds of millions of dollars on a domestic violence campaign that is based on the notion that the whole problem is about misogynist men and men's attitudes to women, when there is this vast body of research showing that it's a much more complex picture than that. So he's been in there asking questions, following up, getting the bureaucrats to supply him with answers which are all total rubbish, and he's in there, digging in there and following up. And when people do that, obviously we need to publicise what he's doing, but we also need to support him and encourage other politicians to have the courage to stand up.
Cool. Just before we go any further, another one of our lovely panellists has arrived. This is Amit Deshpande. Yes? Oh, good. He's the founder of India's Men's Rights Organisation. It's a registered, self-supported, non-funded NGO, which has been listed in the top 100 social organisations of Maharashtra. That's right. I got it. Good. Amit has been seen on TEDx Talks with a groundbreaking speech on men's issues. So, next question. Of course.
Yeah, thank you very much. A Voice for Men wants to welcome our Indian friends from the men's rights community. The Indian men's rights community is very likely much, much larger than anything we have in the West, and I think it truly demonstrates the multinational nature of the men's rights movement.
Cool.
Thank you.
I probably do not know, but I am a law reform commissioner. Recently we conducted an inquiry on domestic violence law. And, of course, this is not only my area. I have other areas that are of my particular interest. One thing that's very telling in many ways is that the Parliament has invited me to attend many inquiries on all sorts of topics. But they have never actually invited me to attend on this particular one. And recently there was an inquiry on domestic violence law. I was able to lodge my submission. I was not told by them about this inquiry. A person had to communicate to me on the matter. When I was invited to attend all these inquiries, 2 days ago I was attending one in the Parliament. So it is very strange that if you have a different opinion, your opinion is automatically suppressed. So it's a very telling problem that when we are writing all sorts of topics, and you get really recognized for your work on all the different issues. But when it comes to this one in particular, we are automatically segregated and discriminated if you uphold a different opinion.
All right. Got another question? Yep.
Just on the talking about the numbers of people online, I'm interested in seeing how you actually think that translates to people going to physical meetings, and if you can tell us how many people have registered to come along to this, not including the speakers and the press.
Thank you. So I believe current numbers are around about 180. So, and we do have a little bit of additional capacity in the hall, but we're actually starting to reach capacity at this point. And in terms of the size of the online community and physical meetings, yeah, we in Brisbane actually we run regular social events. These are actually family-friendly events where MRAs and other people who support us go along, and we invite feminists along if they're happy to have a civil chat as well. And we've been running these for about 2 or 3 years now, and they're really growing quite significantly now. And we probably have about between 18 and 25 people at the last couple actually.
I do want to say, essentially, when you actually go and look on the ground at groups that physically meet, unlike with a lot of these sort of feminist organizations, a lot of the groups that have an interest in the men's rights movement and in which we have an interest are single issue groups. So they're intactivists, anti-circumcision activists, or they are parental, there's an organization in Canada called the Parental Alienation Awareness Organization, and even though we all know that both parents can be alienators of their children from the other parent, the majority of the people who actually feel that in their lives are affected by that are fathers because of the mother bias in custody. There's the Equitable Child Maintenance and Access Society, also helps both men and women, very much supported by the men's rights movement. So I mean, a lot of these single issues groups that we support and we're sort of roughly, loosely affiliated with, or we have communications with, they are not about only men, number one, and they are about specific issues. So it's very, very difficult to, and a lot of them wouldn't say they are MRAs. In fact, one of the biggest, what I would call a men's rights group in Canada, one of the biggest ones, Canadian Association for Equality, which has a specific focus on the issues of men and boys at the moment, and for the foreseeable future. They deal with just about anybody, men, women, gay, straight, trans, all kinds of people, but they don't call themselves a men's rights organization. They're actually quite large, and they get a lot of stuff done. They opened a center in Toronto, and they've opened another one just recently in Ottawa. So what you're seeing is, I think, we don't have the kind of solidarity where we're all pulling everybody under the rubric of one name and one ideology. We're sort of a collection of different groups and all of that all kind of talk to each other, and I actually I prefer that from an ideological perspective, but I really don't prefer it from a political perspective because it makes it difficult to get things done. But yeah, so it really is difficult to figure out numbers and stuff like that. So I don't know if you want to talk about India.
Yeah. In terms of numbers in India, we have got about 45 NGOs registered in 25-30 different cities. And in my place where we conduct our meetings, it's like in our city, the city is so huge, so we have to conduct meetings at 3 different places, and about 120 people get counseled every week. We have our concept of weekly meetings in parks. Like the whole issue with our movement is a lot about it's all voluntary based, so we don't have any office as such or some place, a hall where we can meet. We are getting into all that, but currently the situation is like we have meetings, and in 3 different places collectively it is around 120 people. It's the same in the bigger cities elsewhere as well. So that's size. Yeah.
Anybody else?
Can I just say, I mean, one of the issues is that a lot of men are very uncomfortable about being associated with an organisation where they can very easily be labelled as losers, as as misfits in some way in our society. And it's always been intriguing to me to watch how easy it is for women to get together in a group. They're very comfortable doing that, even to come along to the Red Pill movies. I've been talking to people who, this organisation called Fan Force, which has been sponsoring these, allowing these screenings to take place, talks about the fact that, the minute they get a movie about, beautiful big bodies in women, they get women coming in large groups along and dragging all their friends along and so on. We had a lot of trouble getting men to come along to a screening of the Red Pill because men won't come on their own. They feel uncomfortable sometimes going with other men, and unless their wives or their partners allow them to go, they won't go as a couple. So it's been an intriguing thing trying to make that happen. Men aren't necessarily comfortable meeting up in groups about an issue that society is just so disparaging about, that society absolutely refuses to acknowledge and society absolutely sneers at. Yesterday, Cassie J was on the radio with Steve Austin, who's one of my absolute favourite ABC interviewers, because he's relatively unbiased on many issues, and he too made this comment about, I can't really see where there is an issue with men's rights. He's a man, he's a powerful man, he's a well-educated man, he's obviously never encountered any of these problems in his personal life, and he really was most surprised to be introduced to the sort of topics that Cassie was raising. And he's classic of the well-educated, powerful men we need in this organisation, but they're very difficult to attract.
Got another question? Another question? Anyone else, or would you like another go?
So with this event, I got an email about a week before with the location of it. The location hasn't been publicised for where this is being held more broadly than just for the people that are coming along to it. Why is it something that you still feel like you need to keep a low profile with and kind of keep it under wraps and kind of secret, I guess?
Yes.
The reason that we didn't publicise the location of this event is because it is demonstrable that there will be attacks on our events and attempts to shut them down. A venue by the name of Ultima in Victoria, as I said, received various threats via the phone and so forth, and email, and we've had. Had genuine concerns about this happening to the venue, and we didn't want the venue staff to have to experience that. So, and we didn't want there to be any threats to any risk to our conference. So we kept it under wraps until 1 week ago.
Just to elaborate on that, back in 2014, we held the first ICMI'17 in Detroit, and it was supposed to be in downtown Detroit at the Doubletree Hilton. And we publicized that immediately, and then the Hilton started getting death threats, bomb threats, arson threats, threats of people coming in with guns and shooting the place up. They were quite in a panic. There were marches in the streets demanding that the city council step in and cancel the event, demanding that the Hilton cancel it. And eventually the Hilton informed Voice for Men, who were the organizers, that they had to have, seven police on site at the hotel, and they couldn't be just security guards. They had to be actual Detroit police officers there 24 hours a day for the entire conference to protect attendees, speakers, staff, and other guests who were even unaffiliated, because they were threatening the entire hotel, including other guests who have nothing to do with us, right? And that was a huge, huge expense, and we ended up at the very, very last second having to move the venue to a Veterans Hall, Veteran of Foreign Wars Hall, just in a suburb outside of Detroit. And it was a mad, mad scramble, huge amounts of money hemorrhaging out of the conference, just trying to get all of that figured out and cancel hotel reservations and all of the rest. And yeah, no, we don't want that, and we don't want that not just for ourselves. We don't want that. We don't want to put a hotel in that position. We don't want to put a venue in the position where their staff are being threatened and their guests are being threatened. So that's essentially why we kept it under wraps until a week before. So.
Can I just say something, just in case you think this wouldn't happen in Australia? Renee Gorman is a young student at Sydney University who wanted to put on a red pill screening. The Union of Students decided she wasn't allowed to do that on a university student venue, and so she had to turn around and then hire a hall in order to enable this to happen. And then even then, there were vast numbers of students demonstrating outside the hall on the day the screening was to happen. And I tried to talk to these students. They admitted they'd never seen the movie. They'd simply heard what they thought was in this movie, which was all misinformation. They were screaming and yelling and trying to drown out the screening of the movie and trying to make as much noise as possible. There was a huge police presence trying to make sure that it didn't erupt into anything more serious. So there are serious threats out there. There are totally crazy people absolutely determined to shut down debate around these issues. And there are people who are quite happy to make threats. In terms of other cinemas in Australia who proposed to run red pill screenings, there were attempts to shut down their whole business by posing a whole lot of adverse publicity on their websites and so on. So anyone who, in the beginning, anyone who was willing to allow a screening to go ahead took a real risk.
Yeah, Karen said before, I think it was one of your soundbite things, but it might have been somewhere different, but you used the phrase women's equality. To me that's, I mean, it is a soundbite in it, but it's one that doesn't make sense because equality is a symmetrical thing where you need two things. But in what way do you people see the equality of men and women?
Yeah. Yes, I mean, I suppose the standard response to I mean, I think I first saw Karen do this with somebody. A feminist said that she wanted gender equality. So I think it was Karen responded with, "That's fantastic. So which of your privileges are you happy to drop?" I mean, I can talk about the UK, but at the 2015 election, our manifesto had 20 areas where the human rights of men and boys are assaulted by the state's actions or inactions. In the last 2 or 3 years, not one feminist has been able to tell me of one area where the state assaults the human rights of men and girls. Not one. So the idea of a women's equality party, it just gives me a headache.
Yeah, I think most of the movements like this tend to focus initially on things like legal equality, legal rights, political equality, and things like that. So so institutional and systemic issues. And I don't know that there are any laws in the Western world that discriminate against women. I know there are plenty of laws aimed at ameliorating discrimination against women. And a lot of the times that amelioration results in discrimination against men at the institutional or systemic level. And so what we want to see, because I think that we can all agree that men and women are equal in their value, equal in their right to dignity, to live their lives, and all of those things. I think that they deserve equality under the law, and I believe that they deserve equality in terms of treatment by the system. And when I say system, I don't mean this kind of woo-woo amorphous, that it's everywhere, patriarchy that brainwashes us and stuff. No, I mean the system. So if there's a policy in government that discriminates, I think it needs to go. If there's a law in government that discriminates, I think it needs to go. And if there are informal biases, and a lot of the sentencing gap, I would suggest, is a matter of personal biases of judges and juries. We need to place some restrictions on the ability of people to exercise those biases in order to, all other things being equal, men and women should be getting roughly equal sentences for committing crimes. They should be getting roughly equal help based on need. So I don't think anybody here is going to argue that half the domestic violence shelters should deal with men. I don't even know that it should be proportional in terms of the number of victims. I think that when you have men and women who are different, may have different needs, but what men should have at the very least is a process by which they can legitimate a choice to leave an abusive partner with their children, which is something that they do not have now. They don't have someone who has the authority granted by government to legitimate their decision to take their kids out of that situation. So if they leave with their children, right, they've committed kidnapping and custodial interference. That's what they've done. And so they have three choices. You either stay and take the abuse and be a human shield for your kids against an abusive mother. You leave without them and abandon them to the care of their abusive mother, and at that point you've completely shot any chance at custody because you've legally abandoned your children, and that's a strike against you in family court. Or you take them with you and risk going to prison on felony charges. This is an untenable situation, right? And they don't even have the equality inherent of having somebody say, yes, you made the right choice, and I'm going to talk to the police with you, and we'll get you some help, a lawyer, whatever, and some referrals to counselors. Nothing. They have nothing. So
equality turns out to be actually a relatively complex concept when you start to really look at it in terms of all the various factors that are involved. We often talk about the difference between equality of opportunity and equality of outcome. And I think it would be fair to say that the majority of the people in the men's rights movement endorse equality of opportunity. And that means a level playing field, that people have the opportunity to be the best people they can be, whether regardless of their ethnicity or their gender or whatever it happens to be. When you start putting factors into the system that cause biases and push some people up over others because of those characteristics, then you're starting to look at equality of outcome.
To put it short, I would say that equality should be like, if there is equality in rights, then it should be in responsibilities as well. And that is how it should start. In India, for example, the laws, as elsewhere, but in India they are worse. Domestic violence is legal on men. A woman can file a rape case if her boyfriend breaks up with her, but the reverse is not there. And adultery, if a man charges a woman of adultery, then it is cruelty. But at the same time, paternity tests, whenever there is a suspicion and men do paternity tests, it's found that around 96% of the times they are right. So at one end, like, women are there who think that adultery is not immoral. At the same time, suspicions come true, but it is considered as cruelty. So if we have to talk about equality, it has to be with responsibility as well. So that's what we'd say.
This issue, the legal issue, I think I will reserve to discuss this a little bit further in my own presentation, but I have come across with some cases that are pretty appalling of miscarriage of justice. For instance, like a total lack of due process of law, no need for evidence to be applied, even to when it comes to the final hearing. In Western Australia, they have introduced domestic violence laws that means whatever you call it domestic violence, because it can be very subjective, highly subjective grounds, emotional thing or financial thing. And I was discussing this to my colleague at the Law Reform Commission, asking if I decided to have just my bank account and not have a joint bank account, is that going to be regarded as being financial abuse? And as a matter of fact, there are cases of people receiving restraining orders, being granted restraining orders because of the fact that the husband decided not to share the bank account. But there are many reasons as to why you might not decide to have a shared bank account. Perhaps your wife might have a gambling addiction, or perhaps might be alcohol. There are so many reasons as to why you might decide to have not a joint bank account. So I thought I had prevented the worst to take place. But these people are so fanatically committed to their cause that everything I have put in my report was completely disregarded by the government. They have introduced one of the most radical pieces of legislation in this country, and even removes the need of evidence to be provided when it comes to the final hearing. So a person can lose house, access to the kids, and I have a collection of cases such as this, that a person who is entirely innocent lost everything he has in his life, from house to children, access to the kids, some about 4 or 5 years without seeing the kids. I think this is appalling, and what really amazes me, because when I started to do my research, is why not the outcry? Why is that everybody is so silent about the undermining? And I didn't make a joke. I referred to the Magna Carta to the Attorney General, saying, "Congratulations on your government because you have repealed the Magna Carta in Australia. This is an achievement, because the Magna Carta talks about due process of law. How can you actually regard a person innocent or guilty without proof, without evidence? That is madness, and that's what motivates me. I'm not like, in the beginning, a person connected with the men's rights movement, but I have seen enough pain, suffering of innocent people, and that's what motivated me to be here now.
Any more questions?
Yeah, so you've touched on it already a little bit, the idea that you've got a little bit of support from politicians. It does seem to be, at this point, mainly a right-leaning organisation. Do you think that the men's rights movement is predominantly a conservative organisation, or would you be open to more left-wing parties as well, potentially?
Okay. In India, as such, it's not right-leaning at all. I mean, neither right or left, because nobody bothers about men. So, if you consider it that way, we have a lot of like left-wing parties coming in and pushing in like feminism and all those stuff. So people were a little disinclined with the left, but we cannot call ourselves as conservatives, because conservatives take a very traditionalist line, and we find misandry over there as well. So we cannot call ourselves as right-wing, definitely.
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to say that for most of my life, I've considered myself left-wing. When I was younger, I probably would have called myself a socialist. The reality is I will not call myself left now, because I feel the left moved somewhere that I didn't recognise. So I suppose you could call me centrist now. No, the men's rights movement is absolutely not a conservative organisation, or a conservative movement is absolutely not right-wing. In fact, we're about to form the Australian Men's Rights Association here in Australia, and in the objects of the organisation, the final one is a rejection of enforcement of traditional gender roles. We absolutely, despite what is often claimed, we absolutely do not enforce or want to return to traditional gender roles. As I said, we reject that. So. No, I know many MRAs who are of a conservative bent. I know many MRAs who are of a left-wing bent. We cross the political spectrum.
I do think that the whole left-right dichotomy is extremely simplistic. Lately they've been sort of measuring it in sort of a grid of top being authoritarian, bottom being libertarian, and then you got your left and your left and your right. But I think that personal liberty is at the heart of what we're about, right? And you can have some left-wing views and you can have some right-wing views, and a lot of us are very, very sort of case-by-case basis. You're jumping from one side of the fence, the political fence, to the other. But I think one of the political things that we are really interested in at the moment is just liberty. That's all about due process, freedom from government oppression, freedom from government interference in your life. and undue imposition on the part of by others. So essentially, I don't think that we're a traditionally political group at all. We just we look at our little issues and we deal with those, and we'll deal with the left or the right. I mean, it looks like we're very right-wing right now because the right seems to be the only people who are interested in talking to us. You know, it's very difficult to get a left-leaning magazine or a left-leaning newspaper or a left-leaning TV show to talk to us, and when they do, it's often extremely hostile, bordering on dishonest portrayal. I remember I did an interview with the New Republic, which is about as left as you get in the U.S., and they did a 45-minute interview with me. I recorded it. And there was about 2 minutes where we discussed false rape accusations at the interviewer's request. And out of that 45 minutes, she took, this is all she put of me in her article, she took a sentence fragment of a quote and used it as evidence that, like every other MRA, we're obsessed, absolutely obsessed, and can hardly talk about anything other than false rape accusations. Right? And this is really what the treatment we've gotten in the left-wing press, and the right has been much more fair to us. So,
in the UK, feminists were very, very influential in the three Blair governments from 1997. But when the Conservatives came in, first in coalition and then more recently on, as the sole party in power, they did not reverse one damn thing. They've sold men down the river. And Theresa May, some years back, was photographed wearing a T-shirt saying this is what a feminist looks like. A conservative politician, now Prime Minister. Really quite shocking.
Well, talking about my experience as an academic, I must say that I don't see myself as being conservative at all. In many ways, the students think I'm quite countercultural, because the universities are dominated by these people. The media is controlled by the feminists, and the government is controlled by the feminists. I tell you one thing, I'm not a conservative anymore. I support classical liberal ideas, I must say. I'm a classical liberal. I think everybody should have rights to life, liberty, and property. Everybody, regardless of gender, regardless of religion. I feel very sad that you have now something called identity politics. So rather than just thinking about everybody having the same rights, now we divide society into groups and you create a kind of a war between them. That's not my approach. I'm a classical liberal. And certainly the last thing I would think about now is to be regarded as a conservative. I think I'm countercultural, actually. I think everybody here is countercultural.
Well, I mean, people accuse us often of, you want to turn back the clock to the 1950s. And I always respond, oh, the 1950s when all the domestic violence shelters were for men? Like, yeah, no. This is not about turning the clock back at all. This is not about getting back to traditionalism. This is really about just getting some equal treatment under the law for men and boys. So.
Talking about the Prime Minister, I mean, it reminds me, we have now a conservative Prime Minister from the past 3 years, and situation for between boys and girls, it's so bad for boys, is that more than 50% of boys, I mean, if you see the dropout rates, more boys are dropping out of schools, but still the whole focus is like Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao, that's what they say, save the girl child, educate the girl child. 6 times more boys are employed as child labor in India, but there is no focus on that. It's always about the girls. So even the conservative parties, they are not focusing on boys. So, I mean, we helped this conservative party to come to power, but then we feel cheated. So we will never say that we are conservatives completely.
I just want to say that if you look at the history in Australia of some of the key areas of progress, if you like, for men's rights, for looking after men and boys. We had an inquiry, a parliamentary inquiry into boys' education many years ago. under Conservative government, all sorts of policies were introduced, new approaches to try to engage boys and to stop them dropping out and help them do better. And then when the Labor Party came in, that was all immediately dropped. We had a very reformist Conservative government under John Howard in terms of the family law area, which introduced the joint presumption of shared parental responsibility and reformed the child support formula. And when that government lost power, Labor very deliberately wound back some of those policies. There has been this pattern again and again. I have always seen the Labor Party as more captured by feminists in Australia, but this current government has proved me wrong with this current Conservative government is selling men down the river in all sorts of areas, starting off with Malcolm Turnbull's first big announcement on domestic violence, which was all party line feminist dogma. And so, I mean, it's been a really worrying thing. We've seen, but I still think it's true that the Labor Party in general is far less sympathetic to the sort of issues we're discussing today.
Part of the thing when I've agreed to come here and cover this event, there's an agreement that I've signed, which means I can't record anything through the course of the conference inside this venue. I'm just wondering why that was.
Well, there are a number of reasons for that. We have official recordings of all the talks that are going to be released eventually on YouTube. But there's the fact that we have we need to protect the privacy of the participants in this conference. There are a lot of people out there who would still like to discredit the men's rights movement and would still like to attack individual people who are involved. And there's significant concern that someone would walk around with a recording device, record people having private conversations, and perhaps publish some of that material and try to discredit the men's rights movement as well as those individuals. And we felt this was the safest way to protect the identity of our attendees. And I just wanted to make a point on that actually, that a lot of people probably don't realise that it can be so poisonous being involved in the men's rights movement that a lot of people actually operate under aliases. And there are some cases where I might know the real names of those people, but I absolutely always use the alias of those people. Some people attending this conference here are here under aliases, and we actually have facilities for that, so within our system, so that people could nominate a name. And the reason is because it could be so dangerous for them. We personally, the people who are in the men's rights movement here in Brisbane and the Gold Coast, know people who have lost jobs. In fact, some people who are attending this conference have actually lost jobs because of their involvement with the men's rights movement. So it's absolutely essential that we have to protect them.
Just a quick follow-up.
Could I just get Mike to explain what happened at last year's conference in relation to the MP?
The attacks on him later. I'm not quite sure what you're referring to.
The speech was recorded.
Oh, right, yeah. Okay, so the speech was recorded, and 5 weeks later, the Guardian newspaper, a very left-wing newspaper, decided that it wanted to get rid of Philip Davis. So they had a really scandalous article on one day, demanding that Theresa May fire Philip Davis. And nothing happened. The next day, the headline said something like "pressure mounting" on the Prime Minister to fire him, and it was clearly going nowhere. So on the third day, the Guardian's political editor did a piece saying why it was important that Philip Davis wasn't fired. I mean, it's just an absolute.
From the talk that was recorded in the conference,
yeah,
didn't they?
Yeah.
One sentence out of context, and that's the risk.
You're saying, Rob, that there's a concern that people will go around and record private conversations. What are you afraid is going to be discussed in those private conversations that you wouldn't want in the public domain?
Well, I think it's a matter that when people are having private conversations, often the manner, how they say things can often be more casual. People can have jokes that can be taken out of context, for example, that sort of thing. And the real concern is exactly like they said, they took something out of context. In the context, it was probably a completely innocent statement. Out of context, it was drawn to be made to look in a manner that's very different to what was really going on. So we just know that is the type of thing we've seen repeatedly, and we want to protect the attendees.
And I mean, with the example from the UK, that was something that was there was a talk that was being given, on the stage you were saying that that's going to be released anyway, so people will be able to see that in context, essentially.
In context, exactly. That's right.
And will the talks be released by yourselves?
Yes, so there is usually a period of time that it takes us to edit them, but all the talks are ultimately released on YouTube and elsewhere.
Do you censor time frame?
I'd realistically be looking at 6 to 8 weeks, I think. Yeah.
And they're all released in full, absolutely everything's in there, you know,
Absolutely.
censor pieces? Yeah. Right, sorry.
Okay. Anyone else have a question?
We just talked about left and right and in the media. In New Zealand, and I think pretty much in Australia, there is laws that say the media must give balance when they discuss issues of controversial issues of public importance, is the wording in the New Zealand legislation. What sort of balance do you see on these sort of issues when you try? I don't think it's the same in North America, is it? The media organisations there seem to be left or right.
I'd just like to say a couple of words about that. We launched Justice for Men and Boys 4 years ago, and we've had some BBC coverage, but the Women's Equality Party must have had 1,000 times more than we have. I mean, BBC bias is just staggering. We had a radio husting in Nottingham at the 2015 general election, and I was challenging the Shadow Minister for Women and Equalities. The BBC invited only a female audience, who allowed only to ask questions about women's issues, and whenever I raised a men's issue, the microphone was taken straight off me. I mean, the BBC is outrageous, but people tell me the Australian Broadcasting Corporation is just as damn bad, and the same in Canada. So it's.
We don't. I don't think we have any laws against, as far as private broadcasters. So we have CTV, we have Global. They can be as partisan as they like. But CBC is our taxpayer-funded, subsidized broadcaster in Canada, and they are supposed to be 100% non-biased. And so when the elections come around, they're supposed to run political ads from all parties, give them all equal time, all of that stuff. But when it comes to day-to-day opinionating, you see that bias. And one of the most telling examples was there was a Sunday show on CBC, CBC's The National, called The Sunday Talk or something like that. And they were doing a panel discussion about MRAs. And so who did they invite? They invited 2 feminists and a conservative magazine editor who is not an MRA. And they were discussing, and he really doesn't know a whole lot about us. He actually did very well for somebody who doesn't know a lot about us. But at one point, this was just absolutely perfectly ironic, at one point in the discussion, one of the feminists said, well, I just really don't like, they seem so transphobic and blah, 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 right? And I just worry about trans issues and stuff like that and how they're going to, trample on trans people. And at the very moment that panel discussion was being uploaded to YouTube, I was being introduced for a speech in Vancouver by a trans woman who is the president of their advocacy for Men and Boys Society at their university. So essentially, and she's an MRA. So essentially what you have is this, that is what their idea of balance is. We're going to talk about MRAs with 2 feminists and a conservative who don't know anything about us.
But I have noticed this is a strategy now taking place in Australia, because if you watch the Q&A, for instance, it's quite common that they get about 3 or 4 that would uphold the positions that they would like to advocate and bring the worst of our side. Sometimes the person will feel sorry for the person because he's not qualified to be there and engaged in a discussion. And that's a common strategy, like to get the weakest link on our side and get very powerful and persuasive people on the other side of the debate. They would not invite Bettina out because, of course, they would be trashed by her. She's fantastic. But then they get someone who is not the most suitable person to be presenting a perspective, and normally is a total disaster as a result.
I'd just like to endorse the positions of the other panellists on this matter, and I would also just like to reiterate that I really do think the BBC is in a class of their own.
Just one. Yeah. The only thing I will say in terms of media biases, like people say it's like facing the judiciary. The moment you feel that you're winning, then the statement comes, oh, but the women have been oppressed in centuries, and they just close it out. They just don't want the MRS to win in any debates.
Yeah.
I'd just like to make a very strong case that the ABC is just as bad. The ABC, in its charter, has a requirement for them to present balanced discussion on social issues, amongst other things, and it systematically refuses to discuss most of the issues we'll be discussing at this conference. Last week, ABC News issued us the latest report on male suicide. And it was totally hilarious because they had this graph which showed different age groups all the way from 15 to 85 or something, and the male and female ratio in terms of suicide. And there were these huge columns for the male suicides compared to the tiny columns all the way through for women. The whole report was focusing on the fact that they've actually noticed that lots of elderly men are committing suicide, and they did mention that, and they had key findings. They didn't comment at all on the fact that this is a predominantly male problem, that the 8 people who kill themselves in Australia every day, 6 of them are male. Just one example. I went to every major current affairs program on the ABC, radio and television, trying to get Cassie J onto the big programs. They all refused. Oh, we can't possibly have her on 3 weeks' time. We were really booked up then, said Richard Glover's producer. I mean, what a joke. Varying excuses, absolutely refusing to acknowledge that this is a big story. Australia has become the most repressive country in the world when it comes to discussing men's rights issues, as demonstrated by the reaction to the red pill. And what do? They refuse to discuss it. Cassie had the hideous experience last night on the project of being grilled by a panel who set her up by presenting a total distortion of the contents of the red pill, including lies about its contents, even though we had presented them with the correct data, and then set up the whole panel to attack her, having had her introduced a feminist saying the whole movie was rubbish and no one should bother to see it. I mean, this is, and of course I've been writing about these issues for 30 years. It is harder and harder for me to get discussion of any of these issues into a whole area of our media. ABC is an obvious area, but also Fairfax. There are fewer and fewer publications in Australia that will publish any of this stuff, except for the new social media, which is, of course, where the great hope lies.
Another question?
What do you guys want out of this weekend? What would make you consider it a success?
For us, it is to present what our Indian men's issues are to the other MRAs all around the world. At the same time, to learn how things are working in different countries and what we can offer, what we can learn. That's all. I mean, we'll start with that, and I don't know, we'll have a lot of fun together.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of the conference itself, I want us to continue to raise awareness and get people talking about these issues. But also within the men's rights community, a lot of people won't realise it's a very tight-knit community all around the world. We're constantly in contact. In many cases, it's one of the reasons we hold it in Australia this time is it's particularly a lot of men who have been through the court system can't afford to go overseas. Last one was in the UK. I was fortunate enough to be able to go there. We've brought it here. They can get to know people, they can get to know prominent members of the community like Karen, but they can also get to know the rank and file people who are in the community. You go into a meeting like this and people who've known each other online for years, and they just come up and they hug because that's the nature of the community. So we're strengthening the bonds within our community and also showing the world what it is that we're doing.
I think also just the fact that we can actually have one of these on an international level. I mean, that is kind of a milestone, especially when you sort of see the criticisms. You're just an online movement. Oh, you don't have a brick and mortar presence. Oh, you don't have boots on the ground. Oh, you're just a bunch of losers sitting in your mother's basement, you know, being keyboard warriors, and in between, you know, with Cheeto dust on your shirts. That's kind of the criticism that we get, and the more we're able to actually organize in a real space and bring people together in a real space. Allison of Honey Badger Brigade, sitting in the back there, she's done that a little bit in getting a physical space in the world to have a physical address for our organization. I mean, and that's important. It's important for people to even take you seriously. If you're never out there in the real world, if you're never on the ground in front of and you're just in your kitchen, like me, with your webcam in front of you, it's a little bit more difficult. So I think that this is important on a number of levels, not all of them immediately obvious. So.
Yeah, I'd just like to say. Sorry. Yeah, I'd just like to say that I think it's important. We've got to the stage where I think we have the law of diminishing returns on online work, and I'd like to see a lot of people who consider themselves men's rights advocates, but confine themselves to the online world, and I want them to get away from their damn keyboards, and start engaging with the real world. You know, because I mean, how often do you see someone with a T-shirt? I mean, I've got, my party has T-shirts. This is what an anti-feminist looks like. And sometimes it's like I've got two heads or something. People are just astonished that someone would actually walk in public with that kind of thing, you know.
I suppose what I think about are the poor men out there, the thousands and thousands of men who write to me, who write to Karen, who write to anybody who's out there advocating for men's rights, and pour out their stories to us about what's happened to them, and how they've been absolutely done over by our system as it exists now, and to give them some sort of hope that something's going to change. And I know a lot of them have managed to scrape together the money to come here, and I know we'll all be bailed up in corners listening to all their stories, but that's what it's all about. Getting them here, telling them that someone's working to change things and working out a plan of action.
Got 10 minutes left. Another question? Would you like another one? Anyone else? We good? Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone, for listening. Because we've got a screening of The Red Pill, I believe, at 3 p.m. So we'll see you then. Thanks.
Thank you.
No, fancy that.
Good to see you. Correspondence, yes. Very good to see you.
Very nice to see you too.
This is my fiancée. She's over there.